Welcome back to Takeout. Welcome back to the Conversation Corner. You know how much I love to hang out here. Check your calendar. Yeah, we're still more than a year away from the election to elect South Carolina's next governor, but it is gearing up already to be a very competitive race. The state's lieutenant governor, its attorney general, a state senator, and 2 members of Congress are vying against one another to win the Republican primary, which would almost certainly lead to the governorship. At least that's been the trend line recently. One of those candidates joins me here in the Conversation Corner, South Carolina Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette. Evette, is that correct?
Evette.
Evette, thank you. Pamela, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me. What distinguishes you in this race, and what would you do if elected governor differently than Henry McMaster, the current governor?
So what distinguishes me is that I've spent the majority of my life in the business sector. I started a business, created that into a national company, and then left my business to serve with the governor. I'm the first lieutenant governor ever elected with a governor. So Governor McMaster and I are dear friends, and we work hand in glove, and he's asked me to serve with him 2 terms. And so I think that distinguishes me from everybody else. I'm not a career politician. I've signed the front of paychecks. I've balanced budgets. I've created jobs. And I think that's what we're seeing. In South Carolina, the momentum and trend is they want a business governor, somebody that's been able to do all these things.
I know polling at this stage of a race is not very helpful, but there is one poll. Nancy Mace, who's been on the show, 19%, you 18%, AG Alan Wilson 16%, 35% undecided. What's the state of the race for the primary?
Yeah, it's primary, right? This race will be decided in the primary. That's the way it's been in South Carolina.
By President Trump. Right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm very proud. President Trump is the one that kind of inspired me to leave my business and run, right? I was a Trump supporter when I was sitting at my desk going, we need something else in government. And so, in January of 23, when the president came to South Carolina to talk about running again, out of all the people that has thrown their hat in the race for governor, I'm the only one that stood with him because I really believed he was what the nation needed. And I worked really hard. I've traveled all around the state, traveled to New Hampshire with him, raised a lot of money for him in his 2020 and 2024 race. And so, and I'm very proud of what he's done. And I think he's inspired a lot of business people to get out of their comfort zone and take their knowledge into the public sector and try to make government better.
Does this primary come down to who he endorses?
I think a big chunk of it, South Carolina, it's a Trump state, and we saw that. We had 2 South Carolinians vie to run against him for president, and President Trump, heavy-handedly took the state by storm. And so I think people listen and look, and the governor is really impactful in the state. He's a very popular governor. He took us through COVID very well, and the state has been thriving under our administration.
If he's watching, what's your pitch?
To the president? I'm your person. I've been loyal and I've been there for you, and I love everything you do. And I want to take the things that you're doing, making America great, and bring it right to South Carolina.
I want to ask you about what's going on at Clemson. It has fired 2 faculty members and 1 staff member over social media posts related to the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yes.
How do you come down on that? And do you have any concern that this kind of firing for social media posts separate from what their actual job is infringes on free speech?
I don't think there's anybody that can argue that the foundation of this nation is free speech and we should have it. But I'm a business person. And when somebody's free speech starts to intersect and hurt your company, your brand, those are 2 separate things. There's consequences.
Harm.
That's right. There's consequences, right? And at Clemson, my son goes there. And I was very outspoken. I know the president of the college very well. Him and I talked about this. I didn't just run out to social media. What I am upset with is that I hear over and over again from my children, my children's friends. I have 3 children, from nieces and nephews. It keeps building. How many kids, he'll say, go and ask students on college campuses how many times they've had to write a paper or talk in a tone or a tense that they don't agree with for fear of retribution by a professor. So when we talk,
fear of a bad grade or worse.
Exactly. So when we talk about this, why are we always so worried about protecting the professor and not the kids that, are sitting in a classroom that a lot of parents and a lot of kids feel like they're trying to be indoctrinated? Why aren't we using colleges to cultivate critical thinking? When I was in college, my best professors could argue both sides of a point, And I could walk out of that lecture and never knowing what their point of view was. And that's what we have to get back to, teaching critical thinking. So
how does that embrace of critical thinking factor through your evaluation of Jimmy Kimmel?
So, again, I'm a business person. Was that firing, coming because as a business decision by Disney that his ratings weren't what they should have been? Was it outrage from markets that even now with him coming back on, there are markets that are saying...
It appears to have been influenced by the FCC chairman.
But was that, from what I've read, and again, this is just by what I've read, is that they were mostly calling him out for some of the remarks he made saying that the shooter was MAGA. So it was a lie, not so much what he said, but you can't lie about what you're saying. And I thought that's kind of where the push came from. And I think we have to be careful when we get out there and we say things. I think this rhetoric, I really was kind of offended, like everybody saying, both sides need to tone down the rhetoric. When I clearly saw Democrats over the years, Maxine Waters coming out and saying, if you see MAGA people, if you see Republicans, get in their face, make them uncomfortable, push them out of public places. I mean, that is really violent rhetoric, and we've consistently seen that coming from the Democrats. I never saw, when those Minnesota lawmakers were killed, I never saw one Republican rejoice in that. When it came to, recognizing them on the House floor, the Democrats and the Republicans united to come together to say, yes, we should, acknowledge that this horrible incident happened. We saw Democrats that wouldn't, give any consideration to Charlie Kirk. And I think that, we can't lump us all in together. You have to call out bad behavior. And I think we have to be fair when we call that out.
And you only see it on the left.
Yeah, I haven't really seen much of it. I'm not calling for violent acts. I have not seen that. Now, I'm not saying I've seen every Republican across the country in what they've said, but I've really seen a big uptick in calling Republicans a threat to democracy, calling our president a Nazi. That just incites and moves people who may be suffering from mental health issues. So I think that rhetoric needs to be toned down, and I hope the Democrats are learning from this horrible incident.
South Carolina Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette.
Yes.
Thank you.